very warm welcome to Arts Dynamics Talks and this week's episode where we'll go deep into the world of creativity, especially for us as humans, what it means to be creative, what we can do to be more creative, how we can get unstuck and unblocked with our creativity. So I'm very, very excited to bring onto this episode today and to this talk an expert in this field. Before I introduce him, I want you to know that we have weekly live sessions every Thursday between 12 and 1. We are streaming live into our podcast platforms and also go live on Spotify and Apple as well if you want to listen to the audio version of what we're doing. So who are we? Arts Dynamics, we are an arts entrepreneurship education company and a creative tech cluster. So we gather creators and anyone who's working in the intersection of creativity, tech, and innovation for impact. So as I mentioned, this episode today will be about creativity. Every episode, as you'll notice if you go back to listen to previous ones, we always touch upon creativity, one way, shape, or form. And today's expert, he is, listen to this title, I just love this. He's an ex-punk poet, actor, musician, underground band manager. He's now a keynote speaker and creativity coach, founder of Creative OS. From South Africa, now in the Netherlands. Great to have you with us today, David Chislett.
Thanks very much, Sophie. That's a great introduction.
Yeah, I love your title. You've got such an interesting background, and we are also so honored and so excited that you are also a member of our community. So we will also use this as a member spotlight to connect our community with you and vice versa. But let's dive in straight away. We've got an hour, David. We want to know everything about you. We want to know what you're seeing, what you're working on, and also what you're seeing for the future. But let's first and foremost just do a little bit of an introduction. Who are you for people who might not know you just yet?
Well, I think you did a pretty good job in the beginning there. What I think is important from my perspective is that as a creative human being, I've spent most of my life trying to find a kind of home, a place where I feel understood and where everyone else understands me. I think one of the features of being a creative person is that you don't always fit neatly into all of the little square holes. We're very much more round pegs. And about 10 years ago, I discovered that a lot of other people felt this way. And so what I do now is really about helping people understand better what it really means when we say that we are creative, how that works, and how to rearrange the pieces in our lives so that we can actually be more reliably creative, because it's really good for our state of mind and hopefully also for our pockets. So that's really my focus with the work that I'm doing now.
Yeah, and you have a background yourself as an artist, as a creator. So speak to that a little bit. Growing up in South Africa as well. Yeah, tell us.
I got triggered by my primary school English teacher to write poetry when I was, I think, 10 years old. And I just never really stopped. I'm still writing today. And that inevitably snowballed into getting involved in bands. My best friend at the time was a musician and said to me, you've got all these poems, let's turn them into songs and start a band. And luckily he knew what he was doing, because I had absolutely no clue. And that really just didn't matter. It was experimental. We were having a lot of fun. We were still at high school. We didn't have to make a living out of it. And I think I learned an enormous amount during those years. So much so that during university, I began to then expand my interest in the music business into managing and promoting other artists, continuing to play myself and continuing to write. And it's very much a case of one thing has just led to another. You know, I also did a lot of acting and public speaking at high school, combined with my experience in the music industry meant I ended up then doing a lot of hosting of big live shows and music festivals and conferences and conventions. And that inevitably then began to lead to more training and keynote speaking work, whilst at the same time, I was, really busy helping other creative people through my own marketing business. So it's just been this process of putting one foot in front of the other, and every now and then kind of looking up and going, oh, well, where am I now? And what am I going to do? And so when that process landed me in the Netherlands, it was time for me to really think about surfacing the bigger themes of my life, which have always had something to do with creativity, but also actually always had something to do with helping other people, mainly other creative people. And that's when I decided to combine it more overtly, more obviously into workshops and training and coaching for people needing to understand creativity more. So in retrospect, it looks like a really direct journey. I can tell you that at the time, it did not feel like that.
I think what I really appreciate with this talk today is the fact that not only will we be able to actually address creativity and what it means, but also to talk about the frameworks and the systems we can use to also foster a creative environment.
Yeah.
I often find that in talks like this, there is a lot of debate or discussion around creativity, but it's like you don't really know then, okay, what do you make of this? So let's spend some time on that a little bit later in this conversation. But from that, and speaking of what you just said, you know, as an artist, as a musician yourself, you mentioned marketing and promotion. You and I had a little bit of a conversation prior to this talk about which platforms should we be on as creators right now. And we even talked about, you know, what's working and what's not working. I just wanted to ask for your opinion on that, since we do have a lot of musicians and artists listening right now.
Yeah. For me, the platform question is inextricably linked to why you're doing what you're doing. You know, if you're on a platform of any kind, whether that's a social media platform or something like a Substack, if you do not have a very clear idea of why you're there, in other words, what your goal is, what do you hope to achieve by being there, you may as well not be there. And so I think, especially on LinkedIn, you get all this advice about, well, you should be doing this and you must be doing that. And it's very easy to just go, oh, okay. And off you go and you make all these things without ever having a clear idea of why you're doing it, what it's supposed to bring you. And you can end up burning a huge amount of time, and then it just doesn't convert into anything. And so for me, it's highly personal. I happen to enjoy LinkedIn, and I use YouTube for all of my podcast and video activity. And because for LinkedIn and for YouTube, I already am making shorts, I also then cross-publish to something like TikTok. But I'm not on Facebook, and I'm not on Instagram, and I mean, name another 10 social media platforms, because as a one-man show, I also just cannot slice myself that thin. I would rather get everything that's available off the platforms that I'm on than be getting little bits and pieces from many platforms that costs me so much more extra effort.
And from a creative standpoint, how do you find that decision to impact your creativity?
Yeah, I think when you are too busy, as in you're busy being busy, you know, the busyness of being busyness, your energy then goes in all directions. And I don't know if any of you are aware of the lovely book Essentialism, but when you take all of that effort that's going off in all directions and you put it down in one direction, you suddenly see a lot more progress. And so first of all, your outcomes tend to be better when you're more focused on a platform. But second of all, it's really damaging to your creativity to be so diffuse. You need to be diffuse in order to discover new blocks and dots and new building blocks so that you can make new stuff. But if you are permanently so, the risk is that you never bring it all in and you never then output anything new. Well, not never, but eventually you will run out of energy and you will stall. So for me, the real risk is being so busy outputting that I'm not taking in, or so busy taking in because I'm on so many platforms that I then stop outputting. It's a really fine balancing act.
The fact that we're able to have this conversation right here and right now, the timing of this, David, is so spot on. I hear from so many in our community that say that they feel overwhelmed, they feel stressed out, they lack structure, they lack focus. And even though we know sometimes that social media can, as you said, it can scatter our attention and it can exhaust us, we still often feel the need, especially as creators, to be on all these platforms.
Yes.
And I'm thinking the way, this episode is really dedicated to creativity and the source of creativity. And I think what you're saying right now is very much spot on. I notice that in myself too. Often when I need to go into focus, I tend to pause a lot of social media platforms. In fact, that has just happened again these past 24 hours. So that's really great advice. So thank you for that. And speaking of creativity and marketing and how you use your creativity, we hear from many gurus, many experts who are thought leaders in their fields, world-renowned names, that they say that you should be everywhere, you should be omnipresent. I'm starting to wonder, and I wonder if you've seen this, I'm starting to wonder if it is that they are not artists themselves or creators in that sense. It's a different kind of creativity or a different kind of running a business. What is your take on that? Do you see the same thing?
I think that anyone who is giving lots of advice on LinkedIn clearly is not busy enough doing what they say they're doing in order to have the time to tell you how to do it on LinkedIn. In other words, honestly, I would do what works for you and not worry too much about what all these experts say. There's a reason why people are now concerned about the damage that social media is doing to teenagers in terms of their self-esteem and the amount of peer pressure they experience. And the reason is because it's happening to all of us. And when you're an artist or a creator and you are somewhat out of the mainstream of things anyway, because you are a creator, that often makes us very vulnerable to that kind of manipulation. Like, you're not good enough if you're not doing this, you're not good, because quite often we have never felt good enough our entire lives anyway, because we don't fit. And then that gets compounded by social media algorithms hammering home this message that you're not good enough if you're not on every platform. And we end up doing things because we're told to, rather than because we have understood this option and we've matched it to our own objectives and we are acting with purpose and intent on that platform. Quite often we're just there because we were told to be there, which is pretty brutal when a lot of very creative people are essentially rebels or pirates of some kind. And then here we are all just doing what we're told, like good little boys and girls. So I find that very human, very understandable, but it's misguided. And on some level, we all need to think more clearly about why we're doing what we're doing and where we're doing it, and then how we're doing it there. Because within those answers, you will find a path that resonates with how you see the world. And when you're able to do that, you will be in that space in a way that other people will then go, wow, okay, this person's not just here to show up and make up the numbers. They're here because they believe in it. And when people feel that, they believe in you, and then they become part of your tribe. Whereas if you're just scattergunning the same content everywhere across all these platforms, inevitably you come across as being superficial, there for the numbers, and not engaged and not authentic. So for one, I don't buy that. I think if you're a global brand or you're trying to become one and you want to be a really big business, it makes a lot more sense, because people don't care about a brand in the same way as they do about a personal identity. I mean, sorry, brand gurus, but I don't buy that for 1 second.
It makes me also wonder if there are different forms of creativity.
Oh, goodness me, yes.
Say that again?
Yes, absolutely. Loads of different forms.
Yes. So speak to that as the creativity expert that you are. What kinds of creativity do you see?
Well, I've kind of ended up in this position where I describe the actual creativity, that moment where you come up with this amazing idea, as a sausage machine. So if you're an entrepreneurial business person, all of your dots and all of your ideas and your thoughts are about that. And then you take those and you shove them in the top of the sausage machine and you turn the handle, and what comes out are creative products that are related to that field. If you're a painter, you're then putting in your knowledge of composition, color, balance, all of that stuff in the sausage machine, and you get art out. If you're a scientist and you're looking to come up with new theories to explain how the universe works, or some geometrical theorem, you're putting in math and so on and so on. So as a society, we've become a little bit obsessed with this mythic idea that creativity equals art, and it does not. Art is one potential output of what we very loosely describe as creativity. And there are many, many, many others. I mean, every single human being who has reached adulthood and even earlier is solving problems every single day. And yes, sometimes we're solving problems with off-the-shelf solutions. In other words, it's been done before, we're aware of it, fine. But there are always situations where you don't have the right tools, you're in a different location, some of the information is missing, and then you have to make it up. And we do, because we're creative. And in solving that problem, we are exhibiting our creativity. So, and there's this whole theory of going from mini C to big C. I mean, I understand the distinctions being made, but in essence, what changes is your skill set and the kind of inputs you're doing. As far as I can tell, the actual moment of creativity doesn't change whether you're doing mini C or enormous big C. It's just all the other factors around it that have changed.
And so if people ask, what is the difference then between being a creator and an artist or musician? What's the difference? Is there any?
I don't see a difference at all. I see different tools, different skill set, different environment, but in terms of the making, it's exactly the same thing.
So it's more the creativity at the core is the same, but then it has different, how did you put it?
Outputs.
Yes, outputs. That sounds good. And you had an episode on your podcast, Rebel, Reject, Create, about creative intelligence, and you called it AI Isn't the Enemy, Mediocrity Is.
Yes.
Speak to that.
Wow. Yeah. It's so easy to pick the low-hanging fruit, to use the obvious answer, to go with the groupthink and do what everyone else has always done before. It's easy. And what that means is that everybody does it. And what that means is very soon everything looks the same. And when that happens, progress just stops. All innovation has been created by outliers, people who have not accepted the pattern, who've broken it, who've dared to do something else. And AI is just a tool. It's a super fancy, rather impressive, interesting one. But at the end of the day, it needs to be directed. And if you don't think about it particularly clearly or carefully, you just get slop out. And then you get mediocrity. And then you get your average LinkedIn feed where everything looks and sounds the same, is written to the same pentameter, the same internal rhythm, with the same rule of 3 answers, with a little nice bullet points and the M dashes. And oh my goodness me, do people turn off fast when they see that? So, mediocrity is the ultimate embracing of the herd instinct and refusing to stick your head out above the water level or the ground line. And I understand it as a human survival urge, but ultimately, if nobody did that, we'd probably still live in caves.
And I can sense what you said about the social media and the marketing when you use AI, also depending on which AI tool you're using, because they also have their own rhythm and language that they use. So I'm thinking creativity. You can use creativity. You say it's the same source. That's what I'm hearing you say. The way I see it also, we can use it for different, not only outputs in different fields, but also as entrepreneurs, for ideation and creation. which I'd
Yep.
love to talk more about for this episode. But we also talked a little bit, I touched upon the marketing and the sales. You can be creative in that, but also in
Yep.
how you deliver the service to your customers, how you track and measure, and how you scale. So there are different ways that we can be creative. But going back to artistic vision, creative vision, and based also on the episodes that you've had on your own podcast and people that you've spoken with, can you see any common threads amongst people who are already creators or artists and creative in that sense, how they are using their creativity and what helps them unblock their creativity?
I think the thing that unites everybody
Mm-hmm.
is that they pay a lot of attention to where they find themselves and who they find themselves with. In other words, they are consciously doing things to their environment which allows them to continue to be creative, because they're exposing themselves to new ways of thinking, new pieces of information, trying out new tools, new business models, exposing themselves to new markets. It's a staggering feature, actually, if you go back and you look at the biographical information of anyone who's done something remarkable in the world, right? So whether we're talking about Einstein and his theory of relativity, or whether we're talking about Picasso and his cubism, is that there are key people and key locations without which those things would not have happened. There's a symbiosis, a thinking almost outside of the brain that occurs, which allows us to jump far further ahead than if we follow the mythic version of the creative soul and lock ourselves in a tower and don't eat very much and speak to nobody. The artist in his turret is a very powerful trope that a lot of people still believe in. But the research into the lives of actual influential creative people shows that it's rubbish. It's just not like that.
Is it not though? It is a spiritual practice, I think, in many ways.
Look, I think it's good to be alone with your thoughts. Mm-hmm. But if that is all that you do, it's nothing remarkable is going to happen.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say that also many creative people often have their heads in the clouds, but they also need the feet to the ground so that they can turn their inner vision and imagination into concrete action. Is that what you're saying?
That's part of it, but I'm also saying that what influences that vision comes from that interaction, from being in the world and being, all of the major art movements for the last probably 400 or 500 years have been centered in a place. Vienna, Paris, New York, you name it. Why? Well, because there were loads of creative people there. Why? Because there was some rich person funding the whole thing. Why? Because the public was interested and there was debate and there was knowledge sharing and there was just a whole atmosphere of like, yay, let's do this. And if you just stay in your ivory tower and you don't ever go to Paris or Vienna or wherever it was, you probably would have been left behind. And we tend to forget that. And the joys of digital communication are meaning that you are sitting there lovely in Sweden and I'm sitting here lovely in the Netherlands and we can do this. But if we only ever end up doing things like this, we run the same risk of self-isolating ourselves out of relevance to the people that we hope are going to engage with our work.
We hear more and more in the Nordics that there is more focus on culture-driven urban development and how to create attractive cities. In Arts Dynamics, as you know, we also have Cultural Firewall, which is very much about protecting artists and creators and their artistic freedoms, freedom of speech, democratic values in the digital age. But it's also about empowered creators as to build societal resilience. So those are the conversations we are having here. What about the Netherlands? What do you hear from your end? What are you talking about? And do you have vibrant cities like the ones you just mentioned?
It's definitely something that I'm starting to see a lot more of. And this idea that creatives have a role to play in those kind of environments. I think probably for the last 50 years, it's been left to the bureaucrats and the town planners to figure this out. But thanks to the interactivity of the modern internet, people are beginning to realize that these systems often don't work for people. And worldwide, you're seeing these scandals erupt where things have been managed according to a system and a dashboard, and the human damage has been enormous. The post office scandal in the UK and a child benefits scandal here in the Netherlands, purely because we stuck to the system so much we weren't thinking about the people. And that's making more and more people aware of the fact that, well, if we are not taking the human side first into these things, we risk creating systems and cities and ways of doing things which dehumanize the people who are supposed to be served by it. So it's growing, but unfortunately, we're also still largely in this weird industrial age mindset where do your job, don't ask too many questions, don't think about what happens before, don't think about what happens after, and just get on with it. And it's going to take a while to deprogram ourselves, I fear.
Is that particularly in the Netherlands or in Europe, or?
No, I just think in general, education seems to be one of the last things that's changing. It is starting to change, but the whole idea of standardized testing, right and wrong answers and yes, no, is not really appropriate in an information age. That was really useful when you had to run basically a really dangerous large factory. Now less so, because thankfully the technology we built is doing that for us, but we are still largely educating our children the same way.
And speaking of creativity and education, when I speak with also other sectors, private sector, tech sector, they often mention how important it is with innovation. Creativity is being used as creativity and the creator economy is growing, but it's like innovation. But then someone said something really interesting. I actually mentioned this on a previous podcast episode. It was a banker who said, we know fairly well how to work with innovation, but to them, creativity was something different from innovation. David, I'm curious from your end, do you see that there is a difference between innovation and creativity? And if so, what would that be?
Yeah, I've heard that a lot. I actually had a very interesting conversation with my older brother 2 weeks ago, and he's a business person. He's in the insurance industry. And he said to me, where I sit, we see innovation as a thing that you then have to do stuff with. It's literally they're seeing it as a product. So if you haven't created a new thing, which will change the way we do things, they don't seem to call that innovation, which is quite an interesting way of looking at it. Because the way I understand this is that within creativity, you have products, but you also have processes, you also have the people involved, and you also have the environment. And one of the reasons why innovation seems really difficult to roll out within organizations is that it tends to arrive as this product, this finished thing, and then people are told what to do. So the whole process around the change that is attached to innovation has no human side. It's purely, here it is, reskill, off you go. And more people are resisting that way of doing things. They just don't like it. It makes us stubborn and irritable. And so I think that these things are interconnected. The way that particularly big corporations view innovation tends to be very isolated. We have innovation farms, we have innovation teams. I'm like, well, why don't we just do things on a daily basis slightly different so the innovation can emerge in real time from the teams actually doing the work, instead of someone in a white coat arriving with ta-da, an innovation that I now have to adopt.
I love that. And you work with corporations, you work with so many different clients. What have been the biggest, both aha moments, but also maybe some like, don't do this that you've seen with your work?
Yeah, big organizations are very hierarchical, and they're also very controlling. You have KPIs and KPAs, and that's how you're rewarded. And if you deviate from those things, you are punished. Now, in order to think creatively enough to be really innovative, you're going to need to break some rules. You're going to need to miss on certain KPIs and KPAs. And you get punished for doing that by not being rewarded. And so up to 90% of senior executives say that innovation is the most important thing. But then the surveys show that only about 10% of executives are happy with how much innovation happens within their organization. So there's this massive disconnect between what is wanted and what is actually happening. And in that disconnect lies this unwillingness to do things differently, because it needs to be measurable so that we can hit our short-term growth targets, so that we can realize shareholder value. Nobody has the patience to wait 5 years for the benefits of this innovation to become apparent, even if they are enormous by comparison. We want our quarterly shareholder profit, and that's basically it. If your innovation cannot be seen to deliver that within a quarter, we're not interested. So I've seen that quite a bit.
Is that the biggest maybe obstacle from your perspective? Is that the biggest obstacle to why corporates don't work more with creativity?
I think that is. It's definitely that. And then the other big obstacle is also is just sheer size. You know, it's quite difficult to turn an enormous organization around really quickly. You know, if you use the metaphor of an oil tanker, it's also really difficult to turn it around. It's got a lot of momentum and takes even more effort to turn around than to keep on going. And so the combination of not really being convinced about this whole idea anyway, and then how much extra effort it will cost and the impact that will have on the bottom line. And it's pretty difficult to pull off within corporates in isolated silos. However, if you get to the thinkers up at the top who then start to behave in this way, it can change just as fast. Because the higher you are up in the food chain of a big organization, the more impact your behavior has on the environment. And then people will very quickly adjust their behavior within that environment in order to continue to get the rewards and not be punished. But if the leadership is not consistent and is not living this, is not walking the walk, then it doesn't happen. So the flip side is all of these structures get in the way. But if you're able to convert someone right at the top of the tree, then you can use that and drive change quite rapidly by modeling it.
Have you also heard, I hear this a lot, from people who are not creative or are working in organizations, even in artistic, cultural, creative organizations? Even there, I think there's this misconception that they are not like that, but they are very much so too, where they find that the artists, the creators, the misfits, the rebels, like you said, that they are also hard to control. They are not easily managed, and that with that comes also a hassle to work with them and to be with them.
Yeah, again, lovely myths about all of this. You know, that myth relies on the idea that when we creators are in that unmanageable, rebellious mode, that is like what we're like the whole time. And it's just not true. I mean, for example, I have an enormously structured, quite rigid routine. I experience the world pretty much as chaos, which makes me crazy. So if I feel like that, I cannot do what I want to do. So in order to give myself a feeling of more control, I use routine and habit and structure to make most of what I experience in a day more accessible. And because I do that, I buy myself time and I create space into which I can be creative. And so the trope that you're talking about refuses to acknowledge that maybe the environment we've created, by being so polarized, black and white, that is what works against creativity. You put a highly creative person into that, and yes, they're going to react badly, and they will become unmanageable. Not because they are unmanageable, but because they cannot do what you're asking them to do where you've put them.
And you ask them to do things that's their expertise, and then you micromanage. I see that.
Yeah.
And then that, exactly. You bring them in because they're experts, and then micromanage and tell them what to do, which is the whole point of being a creator, to come up with that themselves.
So you shut down the psychological safety required in order to do this. You are intolerant of the experimentation required to get new answers. And then you also cannot deal with the inevitable failures that you will have, and move way too quickly to discount things before we've actually tested it or experimented with it enough to be able to say, okay, there's a bigger pattern emerging, or yeah, okay, eventually, no, this isn't going to work. Organizations are typically very highly optimized for speed and are very, very optimized to operate from a position of certainty. And when you're being creative and you are stepping into all the uncertainty and the ambiguity to find new answers, you cannot move too fast because you will judge too quickly. You will end up using patterns, and what you do will become same old, same old. And there is nothing certain about that process. So when your management requires speed and certainty, your creativity goes out the window. Put a creative person into that environment and their sanity goes out the window.
And we don't want that. Also, I want to say, I know we've got several people joining us live today. As always, it's so wonderful to have you with us live. If you might be listening to the replay on podcast on Spotify or Apple or one of the podcast platforms, we just really want to say thank you so much for joining us and for joining this conversation about creativity with creativity expert David Chislett. We'd love to know who you are, so feel free to drop a comment below, who you are, where you're from, if you have any golden nuggets, any insights from this conversation, maybe even have a question for David, then drop that into. We'll be happy to answer them either during or after this session. So with that, I'm going to go back. I've got so many questions for you, and it's wonderful to have this conversation with you because, as we said at the very start, it's one thing to talk about creativity and what it means to be creator and human creativity in the age of the digital disruption, but it's also about the systems and the frameworks. And you say that most people don't have a creativity problem; they actually have a system problem. Yeah. What do you mean by that?
Well, actually, everything we've just been talking about is that we're so focused on this aha moment of creativity that it's very easy to overlook everything that led to that moment. Who did you have a conversation with? What did you see? Where were you? And how did you feel? And so the creative operating system that I've kind of puzzled out of all of this work I've been doing, I'm not so concerned with speaking to people and saying, I'm going to make you more creative. That's not what I'm doing at all. What I'm saying is, I believe that you are creative. And by looking at the way your life or your work around creativity currently functions, we are going to optimize it so that you have more space and time to be creative. I'm going to help you think about structures, routines, and habits, your mindset, the way you currently prefer to tackle any creative process, your community, the people you have around you, and so on and so on. Because I firmly believe that what is missing from our creative lives very often is exactly that safe space. I mean, if any of you have ever written the book On Writing by Stephen King, he talks about the fact that when he writes a book, he is in the same house and he gets up at the same time and he goes to his chair and he sits down at the same time every day and he writes until so from 9 in the morning till 12. And the quote that he says, I always get it wrong, but it's something like, bum hits chair, writing starts. He has controlled all the variables that might distract him from his writing by having a routine. So literally, he gets up, he has his breakfast. As he sits down, he reads the last few paragraphs of what he wrote yesterday, and he's in it, and off he goes. And this is why the man has written hundreds of books. Most of us go, oh, that's boring. I'm going to wait for magic to strike while I'm doing something crazy. And then you're in an environment where your brain is so busy with all the options around you that even if inspiration did strike, you wouldn't hear it. And so the operating system is exactly like it sounds. You have to have Windows on your computer before you can run all the software. So my principle here is that if you update your system around you, you can run all of your creative programs way more effectively and efficiently, get more and better outputs by optimizing the things that are working well and working to remove the obstacles that are in your way, even those ones which are between your ears because of your mindset.
So what have been your biggest aha moments since you started to create this program? Because it sounds amazing. And from what I've been able to see also behind the scenes, it's like, David, this is something that's of real value, not only to artistic and creative and cultural entrepreneurs, but to many different people and companies and organizations. So your biggest aha, your biggest insight when you put this together?
I think, I came up with the principle almost by accident, this idea. I just suddenly realized that when you hear anybody talking about creativity or innovation, the last thing they talk about is the environment that it takes place in. But then I began to realize, as you asked earlier on, that a lot of my podcast guests talk about their environment. And I realized that if you go all the way back into the literature around creativity, you'll find Mel Rhodes with his 4 Ps framework of creativity. And one of the pillars of the 4 Ps, he uses the word press, meaning everything that presses in on us. Says if you don't have the right press, you don't get creativity. And I think that was the moment when I went, okay, this is a thing. So that was great, but that's just me, right? I read too much and I'm busy with this stuff, so it was fun for me. But working with individuals now, and I'm working with fine artists, with soundtrack composers, with drummers, with business consultants, you see very quickly that almost everybody knows where they are when they get good ideas. But almost no one has a structure or a tool in place to routinely capture those ideas when they happen. For example, a huge number of people say they get their best ideas when they're in the shower.
Yes.
How many people do you know who have a waterproof whiteboard or a waterproof cover for their telephone or something available to them in the shower so that they can record those thoughts? Or are they all waiting desperately until they finish the shower and hoping they remember everything when they jump out?
I love that. The waterproof whiteboard in the shower. People, this is a great idea. This is a great Christmas gift as well for creators, I would imagine.
You can buy them. I found them online. You can even get waterproof Post-its.
That is so awesome. Oh my God. Cody, I want to hear more. Tell us more about these hacks that you know that we can use.
Yeah. So, I've already told you the Stephen King one, which is, it's, if you look at your average football player, no, let's not look at an average football player. Let's look at Lionel Messi, right? Now, when he's on the field and he's looking to score a goal, it's like poetry in motion. You can see he's not thinking at all. He's just reacting to the changing set of factors of what the other players are doing. Now, people like to say that Lionel Messi can do that because Lionel Messi is a football genius. But when you look at the history of Lionel Messi, you begin to realize that he was fanatically footballing from the age of 4. And that he has spent so much time being on a football field, having a ball at his feet, and trying to do all the stuff that his biggest heroes ever did, that in the moment, he doesn't have to think because his body knows what to do because it's done it 400,000 times before. That's a story that people accept largely, I think, about sports people. They're like, yeah, of course. It's professional sport. Of course you spend hours practicing. But why don't we apply that to the arts or to business? And we don't, as far as I can tell. You can always see the really, really technically committed artists. You can see the people who spend hours every day working on their craft versus those who only work when inspiration strikes. There's just a polish, an extra level of actual execution that amount of repetition and honing your, I use the word craft, but fine-tuning your skill, whatever that might be. And because we believe that creativity is magic and it comes down from the heavens and all you got to be doing is open, a lot of people are reluctant to hone their skills to that level, fearing that it will make them less than. And I think if you only get halfway, it'll make you mediocre, it'll make you robotic. But if you push past that into unthinking, unconscious competence, that's where the magic happens.
And you mentioned AI before. We talked about AI, and I know that there is a huge concern right now that human creativity is going down. That's the worry, the fear that AI, because we outsource so much to AI, that we don't train our creative muscle. So did you have any, obviously you have this program now, which is brilliant. Do you have any more recommendations for how we can actually exercise our creative muscles to combat, the digital influence that's right now coming to us?
Well, it's pretty clear that going AI first has a measurable impact on your thinking. There's a lot of research coming out now demonstrating how critical thinking and creative thinking are negatively impacted when you go AI first. And, people of my age and so, have spent a whole lifetime being trained in critical thinking skills. And so the impact is less on people who are somewhat older, which is kind of weird. My biggest insight around this is not so much that you're going to get AI slop, because you're not necessarily, but that if you're not prepared to sit down with your idea and thrash it out yourself and version it and fail and try again and speak to people, why are you taking it to AI anyway? Because clearly you are not that emotionally attached to your idea. You don't have a clear sense of purpose. Remember what I was saying about why are you on social media? It's the same thing. So for me, the real remedy is when you're working on something that is meaningful to you, that you deeply care about, do the work. And when you need help, because like if you're anything like me, you're all alone, you're a one-man business, and sometimes you need a bit of help, then take the very nearly finished stuff to AI and go, how can I fine-tune this? What am I missing? What is going on? And there I find it incredibly useful. And, I'm a big fan of the sport of rugby. And one of the laws of rugby is use it or lose it, right? So if you have the ball and you're just holding onto it and no one does anything with it, the referee blows the whistle and gives the ball to the opposition. And it's the same with skills everywhere. If you don't use them, they atrophy. If you spend 6 years learning how to speak Spanish and then you go live somewhere else for 12 years and you never speak it, you will have lost your ability to speak Spanish. If you ask AI to solve all your problems for you within a actually quite scary period of time, you will lose the capacity to solve problems for yourself.
So what is the, go on.
Yeah, our brains are incredibly plastic. So what happens is there's a lot of competition for the resources in your skull. And if you stop using one area of your brain to do something, another area of your brain will colonize it to do something else. So you got to watch out for just your biology here as well. It's not just psychology.
Oh boy, so much to think about. What would you say is the single biggest mistake creative entrepreneurs make with their own creativity? You mentioned a few. Is there anything else you want to add?
I think it's very, very easy to have come up with a fantastic idea that everybody's clearly interested in. You've got your investors on board. And then all you do from there onwards is try and push that and take that and leave no room for the time and the effort and the reflection which led to that innovation in the first place. You quite often see with young startups that they have some amazing idea and they get it to a point, and then of course at some stage you've got to do something else in order to be a sustainable business. You can't just be a one-trick pony the whole time. And then what happens is, because they've been so busy getting that thing to the stage where it's now a real thing out in the world, they haven't been doing whatever it was that led to them coming up with that idea. They don't do that anymore. And then they have, either they fail or they sell it and it becomes part of someone else's suite. So the mistake is to put all of your eggs into that basket and to stop keeping time for the next thing, for the next creative thought, to make sure that you continue to do the kinds of things that brought you the aha moment that led you to building this business in the first place. And that's also part of what my operating system does. It helps entrepreneurs think about that, because it's a really common mistake. I've seen a lot of startups, they get to a certain stage and now they need to kick on. They need to broaden their offering. They need to add services, or maybe they need to rebrand and pivot a bit because they've discovered that it doesn't land with their target market. And suddenly these highly creative people who came up with this amazing idea, they can't do it because they have not been doing it for all of that time to get themselves to that point. So that for me is a big, it's a common one now.
This is a big one. This is actually a very big one that you're saying right now, David, especially with how we're using technology right now, because it allows us to skip so many steps. So the solution comes, but we miss the steps that led us there. So we don't have the roots. We don't have the foundations. That's what you are picking out. And I feel this is very important to highlight in this particular conversation. So with your OS system, who would you say are the best customers? Because we have a lot of people in this community, obviously, who are like, oh, we want to know more. Who is this for, the system that you're building?
The first rule of marketing is niching, which I'm very bad at. So I'm delivering the creative operating system in 3 key ways. Number one is as one-to-one coaching. And for that, the key target audience with that are creative. I mean, entrepreneurs is the best word to use, but somebody's using their creativity in order to generate their livelihood. So maybe you're an artist or an illustrator, but you freelance. You're not just doing the one thing. You are definitely the kind of person I want to talk to. So all the way from someone who's building games to an actor to a musician, definitely for the one-on-one coaching. Oddly enough, I've also had some very interesting business consultants as clients, because what they do is hugely creative when they're in a client. The second pillar is workshops, which is mainly for teams within creative organizations or within corporates. Learning to speak the same language about how we approach problems often clears up a lot of issues. And because people don't really understand creative problem solving and what the phases are, they don't have a shared language. So the workshops are very much focused on helping people understand how to lead for creativity, how to lead yourself to be creative, and how to work better with your team when you are in a problem solving, which is essentially creativity situation. And then the third pillar is I present keynotes around the fact that we don't have a creativity problem, we have a systems problem. So those are the 3 main outings. And the keynotes are really for big events or for corporates in-house.
Yeah, that's great. So for our community, obviously we'll share the links in the show notes, and you can also find them on our website. We're not done just yet. We still have a few minutes left, David, and I want to make sure we use every minute that we have together. But I just wanted to get it in there because I think what you're doing is so well needed. You know, I started my career as a stage manager with symphony orchestra and its chorus, and then moved on to be a theatrical stage manager working in performing arts, opera, music, theater, and dance, and later on a producer. So what you talk about, the systems and the processes, how to create safe environments, to manage creativity, to make sure that you have a structure that allows for people to feel safe so that they can create freely. I know firsthand how extremely important that is, and what happens if you don't do that. And the fact that you are doing that now in this context for entrepreneurs is very forward thinking, and it's something that's been missing, I find. So it's great that you're doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, I've just recently discovered a man by the name of Mark Dozer. He's a professor at the University of Amsterdam, and he published a book about the creative media sectors. And the subtitle is "What You Love Can Also Make You Sick." And he spent years doing research across the entire world, where he's discovered that actually in the creative cultural media sector, the rates of burnout and mental illness and issues are way higher than almost any industry except the medical industry. And that's because quite often people end up being theater managers or studio managers or what have you, because they are highly creative, good producers, and they don't really know how to manage. They certainly don't know how to hold psychological safety in a safe space for people in order to be creative. And then the creatives don't leave, even though it's killing them, because they're passionate and they love it and they stay way too long and it goes badly wrong. So there's a whole body of research coming out now around this, and it's insane, actually, like how at risk the very people are who create our culture, because they are being managed as if they are widgets and not creative human beings.
Yeah, and they're often very good at problem solving. So if ever you need a problem solving in an organization, I met someone who said, I'm from the performing arts. This is what we do all the time. It is so true. Whenever something is needed, you need to come up with a solution. Then they are used to that because it's just part of how it works in that sector, in many other sectors within the cultural and creative industry. So obviously, this is a huge benefit for organizations outside of these sectors to bring people in from the arts world. But as you said, that also means that often they tend to burn out, and that is not good. So looking towards the future, some future trends, it's always nice, you are at the very forefront of this. What are some future trends that you are seeing in the space of creativity that we should pay extra attention to?
What I'm seeing, it's not necessarily directly in creativity, but it's related, is this idea of human first, and how people are suddenly beginning to realize that, wow, we've spent a lot of time being way too focused on our technology and not actually focused on people. And I think that is an incredibly important emerging question. I mean, can you imagine that we end up living in a world where AI and robots do absolutely everything that is not nice to do, right? Like clean the streets, maintain the sewers, doing absolutely all of that stuff so that we could live in a paradise on Earth. What would human beings do then? What would be left for us to do? And I firmly believe that one of the reasons why we can see populism and nationalism and racism on the rise is because we do not have enough inspiration for the future. And so we are missing mythic golden ages from the past, and we're trying to recreate golden ages from the past, which inevitably involves colonialism and an empire and a whole bunch of less than desirable stuff. When actually, if we are able to harness the power of our technology, we could be creating absolutely anything. Space travel, fixing all of the environmental problems that our Earth faces, creating great art. And instead of worrying about the economics and how are we going to make money, saying, well, we're exporting our culture, we're exporting our art. And that, because when you make something yourself, it's always more meaningful and personal and powerful than if it's just a mass-produced artifact you pick up off a conveyor belt. So I'm really happy to see this conversation leaning more towards humans first, because ultimately, this is why I do what I do, is to help more people empower themselves with their creativity. Because out of anything in our world, it gives you agency. It gives you control over your own destiny. And my goodness, if we could get our technology to do all the dog work and we could all be like that, we would live in a very, very, very different world.
What is one thing I haven't asked you that you would like to answer?
Now, you've asked a lot. Well, what you haven't asked me is if I can tell you what creativity actually is.
Please do.
I can't. Its expression takes so many different forms. And I told you about my theory of the sausage machine. That's as close as I get. It's a joining of the dots. It's something that we do because it's how our intelligence functions. But further than that, I can't take one side or the other in the debate about what creativity is. It feels quite unknowable. My standpoint is I don't care, but I know how to get more of it. So let's focus on that. Oh,
And
that's
maybe
just,
also when you know, you know.
This is one of those things, right? When you
yes.
know, you know. Wonderful. Well, our hour is already up. I really do hope that people who've tuned in live, that you've enjoyed this conversation. I sure have. I feel that it is such a blessing, David, to have you on to talk about creativity, and also from your lens, because as we said at the very start, every conversation we're having here on Arts Dynamics Talks, and also whether it is cultural entrepreneurship or arts and business or technology, creativity, we always come back to creativity as if it is, as you said, this mystical thing, or everyone is creative. What does it actually mean, and how can we channel our creative, not only our creative energy, but how can we use that also for good? And you brought in a very wonderful example at the very end, also how we can bring hope for the future. That is what I'm taking with me. So finally, David, where do people find more information about you?
Yeah, davidchislett.com. Nice and easy, with 2 T's at the end of chislett.com. And there you can use my contact form. We can set up an intake conversation about whatever it is that you might need. And you can also watch some videos. You'll find my podcast there. It's all on the website.
That's fantastic. We'll make sure to include that in the show notes. David is also a member of Arts Dynamics, so you'll find him also inside our community. So feel free to join us as well on that platform. You find it on artsdynamics.com. And I hope that we're able to bring it back, David. We need to continue this conversation. So we've got more things planned, and love to have you on there as well. So with that, everyone, another week at the very forefront of creativity, tech, and business for impact. This is Arts Dynamics Talks. I'm Sofie Marin. I'll be back next week. Next week, we're going to go deep into cultural firewall. Again, we did that last week. We're going to go back next week with Hanna Linderstål, who is part of our advisory board within the cultural firewall initiative that we have. I think I mentioned at the start, I've developed this framework with 5-element kraft in Swedish, which is the artistic vision and creativity that we talked about today. The second one is about resilience and high performance that you need to make sure that you're sustainable, which we've also actually touched upon today. The third one is the business side and how you start, grow, and scale your artistic business. The fourth one is the cultural firewall, how you can stay safe in a digital world. And then finally, all things tech and digital. So from that lens, we've had this conversation today with David, and next week with Hanna Linderstål. So you're very welcome back next Thursday, the same time. And as I mentioned before, you can also find this podcast on our website and also on podcast platforms near you. So thank you so much, David, for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And thank you, everyone. See you around next week. Over and out.